welcome to the next episode of the ADHDads. This is episode 4 we're in now. I'm CJ.
Hey,
and that's JJ.
JJ here.
And we are the ADHDads. So thank you guys for tuning in. This episode, we're going to be talking a lot about anger. This is kind of a topic near and dear to my heart. Not that I'm an angry father or anything, but I definitely would say that I've definitely carried some anger with me in my life and have been working towards kind of dealing with that and trying to live with it in a healthier way. And I believe, and I think my family would tend to agree that, that I've come some leaps and bounds with it over the last few years here and had some really great progress. So I just kind of wanted to share my story and some tools that I've kind of been using and to talk with you, JJ, and kind of see how your experience is with it. And if this is something that affects your life in any way, because I feel that a lot of men and a lot of dads out there struggle with this. We are the man, the hunter-gatherer. We like to fight or flight, right? We like to have that aggressive response to life sometimes in stressful situations. I see this quite often. I don't know if it's just me, but, I think that this is a topic that I'd like to bring to our listeners, seeing if anybody else struggles with, and maybe have a discussion of, methods that, you've tried, they've tried, I've tried, and what works.
Yeah, man. I mean, anger is definitely it's funny that the holidays, unfortunately, the holidays for me brought about more of that impatience and anger that I tend to feel like I do a pretty good job of, keeping at a distance a lot of times. But, the history of trauma and family and, just kind of being raised in a certain way and then, revisiting those relationships as the holidays tend to come around. That's usually when my patience seems to get thinner and my anger rises. And unfortunately, I kind of fall back into old habits. And so this is timely for me as I had to process anger in some healthy and not so healthy ways this last week.
Whoa. Hold on. You're telling me that the holidays make you stressed out? What is it about the holidays that make you stressed out? Is it the crippling credit card debt or the unwanted family visits or the weight that you gain or the holiday traffic?
Oh man. You know what? And we just had a massive snowfall here and you're talking about the snowball effect. It's so freaking true. A white Christmas is an example of something beautiful and something that could be entirely the other direction. And yes, I experienced probably all of those things. And when you look at your credit card bill and you say, wait, what did I do? And you start itemizing it. You're like, well, the only person I can be angry with is myself right now. So definitely been angry. Anger is going in so many directions, but we're here to talk about how we can work with that to make a productive person and relationship, with the people that we're with. So that's fun. I'm excited to get into the good parts. Yeah, man.
I'm going to be honest. I'm surprised to hear you say that you struggled with anger over the holiday here because you seem like one of the most timid, calm people that I've met in my life. So to hear you struggle with anger makes me feel good about my own life. It's a little sense of we all struggle with the same thing. So tell me about that, brother. What does that look like for you? What does a JJ meltdown look like?
I think the thing is, I had two different types of parents raising me, and my mother especially raised me. And she's the anxious, pursuing type, and my father is very much the kind of the avoidant type. So he'll go quiet, he'll go silent, whereas my mom will just kind of keep coming at you. So I kind of developed, unfortunately, two different methods in one. And the worst part about it is sometimes what happens with that. And it happens with most avoidant personalities is you hold it in because you struggle with conflict, because when you've experienced conflict with one type, the anxious type, you hold it in and then eventually it comes out. And then the two of you are already, at 100%, rapid fire. You're not really listening anymore and stuff. So you're experiencing this unhealthy back and forth where neither one of you has taken the opportunity to kind of step back and ask questions and maybe really think about the other person because you're too busy just trying to throw jabs of defense. And then you're also trying to win your point, even though it's probably quite irrational at that particular point in the conversation. So I experienced a lot of that. And then the thing about that is, that was kind of what I had modeled for me for so many years. And, I have to take ownership over that someday as well. But because that was kind of what I lived in for so long, my relationships, whether it's romantic or friendship or even with my child, sometimes what I do is I put my ego in front of the other person's point of view, maybe in front of my own rationale. And therefore, I'm operating out of a place of fear and defense rather than a place of curiosity and understanding and empathy and asking questions. And that's how we usually get, entrenched in our situation, against the other person. So instead of really coming together, we're just actually further pushing each other apart, throwing bombs at each other's trenches and stuff instead of, making some effort to come together. So then, when it comes to my parents' visits, it's hard to manage that because I have this little kid in me and I have the mother that I've grown up with all these years operating in her space. And there's certain things that are always triggers that I experience with her. One of those big triggers for me is, let's say I have something to share and either I get interrupted or I'm invalidated. And if that came from somebody else I'm in relationship with, it might be something that I kind of brush off, no big deal. But when it comes to my mom, it's expected. So therefore, I'm on edge when I'm visiting with her. And then the same thing with my son who has ADHD. He has a tendency to not really listen all the time. He has more of a, this is my unintentional self-centered approach sometimes because he's also a kid. He's got that egocentrism going on. That'll be a trigger in me as well. So instead of being there and honoring my son through care and empathy and, just patience, just slowing down some, I get in that, that anxiety or that anxious mode. And I want to just like kind of hash it out when he's not even aware that we're supposed to hash something out at that time. So I've had both the anxious and avoidant personality types. And unfortunately, in my relationships, when I get closer to somebody, the anxious part comes out more. And usually at an inopportune time, because in my marriage, I had somebody who was an avoidant type. And then therefore I would be like, well, no, we got to figure this out. Oh, don't go to bed angry. Well, I usually went to bed angry after having an argument because my stupid anxiety got the better of me and my patience was lost and my defenses rose. And here I am fighting rather than actually really, truly trying to pursue a resolve. I was trying to pursue the answer to what was in my head rather than what might have been in the other person's, head and where they were at and what they were feeling.
Yeah, my dad was a big guy, man. He could carry his voice. He could throw it around his weight, Maybe it was just me being little, but my dad he seemed 100 feet tall. He was just, his voice carried. He was a big guy. Any movement seemed jarring to me as a little kid. And my mom, that's an Italian family there. So, Italians are always yelling. That's just the volume we speak at, So it wasn't until I, left the house and was in college that I said, people don't talk at this volume, and had to kind of like look at that and what that looked like socially and in dynamics like that. So, and I think a lot of people that maybe have anger problems or aggression problems are caught in a space of not knowing why. Right. I think that a lot of people, they feel anger and they don't want to feel it. So they turn away from it. They shove it down and, oh, well, I had an anger thing. I don't want to think about why or what, or just move past it. It's over. It happened. And I think a lot of the quality work and progress within this kind of emotion really goes with the work that we put into it and how we look at it and what we do. And I just don't think that our parents came from that generation. right? They weren't going up and picking up, screen-free parenting or how to control your anger or some of these other books that are out there. It just was, you dealt with life. There was a rhythm to it. You just had to move with it. So, but I think that there's a discussion, in the dad space and in the man space, in the self-help space nowadays that's, really inspiring to me to see how men are more active in this field. They're more engaged. They want to better themselves. They want to create more meaningful connections with their family, with their kids, with their coworkers. So there seems to be a lot more resources out there for guys like us, and how to kind of help that kind of stuff. So I'm curious. Is there what are the triggers for you? Like, what is the typical thing that kind of that gets you there? You had mentioned that kind of frustration, that not being heard or miscommunication. And, from a lot of men and dads that I've talked to and worked with, that seems to be a typical response, right? As they come from like one of three camps, if not all three. And that's usually like the weight of responsibility, right? Like the bills, the work, the financial responsibilities and repercussions of life. And then there's that respect piece. I'm not being respected. I don't have any power. I feel belittled. And then there's that piece of frustration or miscommunication or being misunderstood or misheard. At least those seem to be like the top three in my experience, and definitely from my own personal experience, I think I fall into all three of those camps. When I get all revved up and start sweating and that vein pops out of the neck or whatever, or I lose control of the tone. I usually fall into one of those three camps. So I'm just kind of curious what it is for you, or if you're able to identify it, or what you notice.
Obviously there's a lot to unpack there, but again, kind of going back to, you're kind of elaborating on some of the things that I was sharing. You're kind of getting to the next step of understanding. Talk about anger. Well, anger is essentially a secondary experience to what's going on underneath, right? And one of the things that I didn't have growing up was the opportunity to speak to what was going on underneath. And that was really hard for me, and still, creates triggers in me as a result. And, what a big thing that I struggled with, that I still struggle with in terms of, my parents, is just having that validation, is actually, before you could call it judgment, criticism. It seemed like my mom always wanted to create a teachable moment in me. So she would say a lot of times like, well, JJ this and this and that. And I remember there were many times where I would try and open my heart up a little bit to my mom and tell her this is what I'm experiencing. And she would often do this tactic where it's like she wanted to be the parent in the situation. She says, well, if you change this, or you did this, or if you didn't do this, you have a tendency to do this. It wasn't hearing me. It was just telling me, like trying to parent me, trying to tell me, you don't have everything figured out. That's what it felt like. So invalidation was a big thing for me, not really being seen or heard, but more or less being talked to and being told this is how you need to be, which basically, in another way felt to me like, well, obviously you have flaws and you're imperfect. Let's focus on those. And then we'll talk about why that's causing you struggle now. So that didn't really create in me a sense of trust with my parents as much, because I didn't have that ability to go to them and have conversation for them to chat with me. Unfortunately, I would say too, I've done some of that with my son, and he's really done a good job of pointing that out to me. We were at the Children's Museum fairly recently, and I think I might have shared this previously, but he was gathering up all the toys, and one other kid was gathering up the rest of the toys and stuff. And there's these other kids, quite a few in the room. And I said, well, Cohen, I think you need to share some of these with these other kids. And he goes, why are you only, talking to me about this? Why are you always, coming down on me? And it's like, that's a valid point. That's a valid point. How do I talk to my son in a way that's at first, really trying to understand where he's coming from? So with anger for me, in my experience in life, it's that I didn't ever really feel like I was being heard. So what triggers me now? Well, take for example, let's just talk about in a professional setting. You're doing some good work. Maybe you're starting to really, like what you've created. And then somebody comes along and asks you like, well, why did you do this? And you feel that defensiveness, or maybe we want to see it in this way. And you're like, well, I've already kind of married myself to what I've created. And now somebody is kind of picking it apart and, suggesting that it could be better in this way or that way. Well, when I was younger, what did I get? I got told, you could be better. You could do better. And now I've got somebody in my adult life saying something that in some ways sounds similar, and I'm being triggered. And therefore I'm feeling this growth of anger in me because I haven't addressed the fears and the challenges and the insecurities that came with how I was raised. So a lot of my triggers when it comes to anger are based in, of course, the person that has been molded and shaped into who he is today and is trying to push away from some of those bad habits in communication and really more or less trying to understand himself better. Because, I have a major belief in people that most people want to be good and do good toward others and want to have a good, happy life. So I generally will go out into the world thinking that. And I even give trust to people. I don't have them, try and earn my trust. I just freely give it. And the reason for that is because I don't think it's fair of me to already put a person in a place of judgment or somehow I'm above them and therefore they need to, work up to be at my level. I mean, can you imagine that? Like, let's say your kiddo is born and right away, instead of saying, hey, stop, or instead of saying like, oh, he's crying, you got to comfort him, you'd say, stop crying. That just doesn't make sense. Or when they start to learn to walk, say, oh, well, you fell over there. Look, obviously you don't know how to walk. That doesn't make sense. But somewhere along the lines, we start making corrective, or we try and correct the behavior in these young children. And that's kind of what I started to feel as a regular pattern in my life. And therefore I get scared of criticism. And instead of being able to process that in a healthy way, a lot of times I revert to that little guy who thinks he's being told he's no good. And there's where my anger primarily exists. And now granted too, my son sometimes out of his ADHD brain, he could be doing this amazing imagination in his mind. He could be creating something beautiful. And for the people around him, oh, he's being noisy, he's being distracting, he's being, something's just kind of, bothersome in his behavior. And here I am as a dad, not really understanding him, but instead trying to understand the situation as other people see it. And therefore I start to suggest to him, hey, buddy, I need you to calm down. And maybe he's not. And then I get more impatient and worked up about it. Whereas, I'm doing kind of something similar to what I experienced. And that's not really learning who he is and what are his gifts and how can I cultivate a situation of growth and power in him rather than stifling that. So I guess all this being said, the anger kind of comes back around to who I've been, my insecurities, and how do I practice something healthy and in response to all that.
Yeah. It's funny because, if I sit here and I really try to think, I don't think I can tell you one scenario in which anger has worked purposefully in my benefit. I mean, really, unless it's been like a fight or you're defending yourself or you're in a violent situation that you're backed into a corner and you need to get out of, what good is anger? When have you brought it into a professional environment and you've walked away both winners? You felt like when have you brought it into your marriage and it's worked? When has it worked out as a parent? I mean, really, it's like you said, the secondary emotion that we've prioritized in our lives for so long, and it's this ingrained instinct of this fight or flight that we needed when we were these mammalian primates, trying to survive in this crazy world, but now it's taken on this crazy existential weight to it, right? Because there's that flight or flight is almost dissipated from our lives completely, and the fight or flight is now this existential crisis. It's a test. It's the meeting at work work, it's the deadline, it's the kid's graduation, or the whatever the responsibility is, the bill that you got to pay. That's where the fight or flight is coming in now, right? And we take everything, like every scenario that we go into is a battle in our minds. You either got to run from it, or you've got to violently be the aggressor to conquer it, dominate it, overpower it. So how do we, in all of the evolutionary existential, progress that we have on our heads here, how are we able to kind of pull ourselves back and realize it's a tool in a secondary emotion that's sparking something that needs to be handled, in our lives, in our communication, and in whatever's going on that we don't like, and it took me a long time in my life to think, how can anger be a tool? I never looked at it like that, through a good chunk of my life. Anger was not a tool. It was something to never feel, use, implore, walk with, or think about. And I think the mindset of that in a long time made it very destructive and controlling in my life. I would maybe have a little bit of dominance or control over it for a short period, and maybe could implore some methods here or there, or push it down for long enough. But when it came up, as it always would, it was this bubble effect. It was this exploding effect, and it could be anything from sound stimulation, with 3 kids and dishes and music and toys being thrown around and yelling and screaming and fighting, and, just the simple stimulation of sound can just like make the face turn red, and the blood pressure start going up, and short breaths, and something just as simple as that, just as something as simple as daily life, and again, I think I saw a lot of my dad and my mom do that, and I carried that with me into my 20s, when I would get stressed out or overwhelmed in certain scenarios of life. And it wasn't until I started thinking about anger in the in-between moments that I felt I really started kind of gaining a little bit of power back into it. When I started thinking about, how am I going to show up the next time? What am I going to do the next time that I feel overwhelmed, that I feel frustrated? How do I want to show up? Who do I want to be? How do I want to handle that? And then thinking about that as often as I could, throughout the day. And that's not always easy, right? My little rabbit ADHD brain is going a million different directions, so to think about that all the time takes a little bit of mental gymnastics and some practice, and I would do things like maybe set alarms on my watch every hour, just to take 20 seconds to just breathe, just big box breaths, or Wim Hof stuff, just calm the soul and always keep it grounded. So it's not that hourly buildup of, oh God, that was stressful in that last hour. Oh, now I'm even more stressed in that hour. It's just a nice, calm reminder of, let's bring it down a notch, ground yourself, put all that stuff away for just 20 seconds, and, another thing, some totems I would like to set up. We talked a couple episodes ago about our family mantra. I got that plastered. I got our family one plastered on the wall over here with our photos. I've got one above my workspace here, above my desk. That's my own personal one. So everywhere I'm going in the house, I'm seeing that family mantra there, that personal core statement here, who I want to be and how I want to show up. They're just all over the house for me to just catch my eye on. And yeah, I don't always pay attention to them. Sometimes you just walk by and you don't even look at it, but they are there for me, to remind me. And I'm not wearing one today, because I just did cooking with the kids here, so I just took it off. But I usually wear a bracelet around my wrist here, some beads, some minerals and crystal beads, and I'm not really too into that kind of stuff. I'm definitely not a bracelet guy. I've never worn bracelets in my life, but I put those there and I wear them throughout my day, because if I ever get caught in that moment of where I'm pointing at the kids or I'm wagging my finger at them, telling, why did you do this? What was it? Why are you doing this? You shouldn't do this. Those little beads, they jingle around my wrists. and they stop me in my tracks, and I catch myself waggling these noisy beads as I'm pointing my finger at the kids, and I can pause and I can stop, and it can bring me back. And I've put intention into that bracelet. They're the calming crystals. They're for balance and calming and tranquility. And again, though I may not believe in the power of those things, the intention is there. I got those beads. I looked at it. I thought, how I want to show up and who I want to be, and I put those on there. So every time I hear those wagging, it can make me slow down a little bit.
Yeah, man. One thing that that I try and create sometimes, like saw somebody bounce around in the background there. I try to make a metaphor or something, regarding emotions and stuff, and then I try and remind myself about the coping mechanism. Anger is a coping mechanism a lot of times, but it's usually a coping mechanism that we can't rely on in ourselves. It's very much it's destructive most of the time. I look at it like when we're in a state of vulnerability, we're essentially like we're adding the what's behind the anger to like let's just say each piece is like water into a water balloon. Like I'm not good enough, or I don't feel loved, or whatever it is. And when it all compounds and it just like starts to fill up the balloon, if it's a water balloon, it's just going to explode really easily, and it's all coming out as anger at that point. And we're no longer labeling the individual pieces that have brought us to this point, but instead we're just acting out of that anger because it's just exploded. It's in our face. And if we work through these mechanisms, these coping mechanisms to be more elastic, and we can handle more of the water that's being filled into it, we can kind of address it and then, work with it. Like you mentioned your totems, it's a good way to kind of snap us right in the moment. My big thing that I struggle with in the moment is reminding myself, like, this is a two-way street. Rarely, sometimes I walk through the house and I stub my toe, and then I thought I placed something on the counter and it fell off the counter. And so it's all within my own bubble, and there's nobody else, trying to like poke at the bubble. It's just me making these little mistakes, and then I get angry over it. There's that. But then for the most part, when it comes to damaging our relationships with somebody, it does involve the fact that we lose that sense of the other person and where they're at in this exchange. So at some point I'm reaching out to my other person in this exchange, and I'm actively trying to involve them. And then maybe, something doesn't hit me quite right, and I get a little closer to my chest until at some point I'm just literally just within my own feelings, and I'm not actually anymore trying to be of some sort of mindset and understanding of where they're coming from in this. And that's where we get in trouble. When we've gotten to that point, the balloon's exploded, and I'm just going to fight for my position here. And usually that's the one. I think there's a Chinese proverb that says something along the lines of like acting in a moment of anger, or acting with patience in a moment of anger will save you 100 days of sorrow. The anger part, when we're fighting out of anger, we're actually doing more damage that takes more time to repair than when we sit back, which is so hard to do when we're not facing forward, but instead we're kind of leaning back and suggesting, well, here's where I feel angry. This is what set me off. What is it about the other person that's making them feel unheard or mistrusted or whatever? What are they feeling? Because if I can give myself some sort of credit to how I'm feeling, well, that person isn't insane and doesn't deserve credit for how they're feeling. What do we need to do? Your totem helps and stuff. What else do we need to do? For me, I shared that one story about my son. I didn't see myself in the situation as much as I saw where he was at. And then I was acting in response out of my irrational fear and anger. But when I got to look at that camera view and see how I was actually physically being present, that's where I realized, oh, my emotions were not in check there anymore. And I wasn't listening to him. I was listening to myself. And I was, for some stupid reason, think I needed to act out of self-preservation with my own little child here. That's just That's just no way of approaching a situation. So what do we need to do? Totems are great, but of course, daily practice. If we're practicing those mantras with our kids, we need to practice them in good moments too. We need to make good moments a highlight. Yes. We don't need to say, okay, well, I need something truly spectacular to happen to bring praise and connection to this situation. No, we need to make that happen every day. And we're not coddling our kids. We're not making them snowflakes or anything like that. We're creating beautiful adults now when they're children. We're raising them to be extraordinary adults now by giving them this gift of appreciation, of acknowledgement, and not focusing in on, again, we talked about reactivity last time, not focusing in our reactivity in our irrational brain when those flood of feelings come out as anger.
Well, and we're talking about ADHD kids here too, right? And, we've talked about kind of how, what is maybe the difference between this and quote unquote normie or neurotypical kid, right? And I think that, ADHD kids are emotional. Kids are emotional in them sense, especially in adolescence and preteen and all of our pubescent stages. Emotions are at the forefront. They feel out of control. They feel real. They feel intense, right? And I think for the ADHD kid, those emotions are just ever more present and ever more real and ever more powerful, so having the skills and the tools and the ability to calm ourselves, control our emotions, and deal with anger in a healthy way in front of our kids, for our kids, will just benefit them, I feel, so much in the long run as they're maturing into adult relationships and work environments, so giving them the tools to handle this stuff and show up for them and talk about emotions in a safe way, I think is like ever crucial here, and we were talking about kind of the triggers of anger here, and I think that validation piece is probably the most predominant out of the three that we talked about, right? Like the kind of the weight of the responsibility, the respect aspect, and that validation piece, that piece of I'm not being listened to, I'm not being understood, is like the one that really seems to get the blood pressure going, right? And if we could all implore that kind of that mental space that you're talking about and that curiosity where instead we're not looking to dominate our perspective in this talk, but rather are curious to find out what is making the other person angry or emotional. If we can both come from a place of that, I feel is really the benefit of dealing with this. Because like you said, when you're in it and you're feeling the emotions and the shit is hitting the fan, it's hard to remember all the Wim Hof methods and the count to 10 and the identify 5 blue things in the room and do the ABCs backwards or sing a song, right? Like all of that shit's out the window because you're in the moment of my feelings are the most important thing right now. And I have to convey that to this other person, even if it means getting loud and demonstrative. But if we approach it from a place of curiosity, silence, respect, validation, and empathy, then we understand more. And with more understanding, we have more tools to calm down, to combat. And like we're saying, it's hard in that moment. And I've said this before on some previous episodes that we've done. I think that the work and the success of dealing with your emotions and anger here isn't in the moment. It's the 90% before and after. It's what you're doing when you wake up in the morning to set your mind right, to get into your headspace, to take your you time, to meditate, to practice gratuity, to think about how you want to be intentional for the day. Those are all very important things to do in your day to avoid those blow up moments. You have to have the totems, the alarms, the mantras, the moments for meditation and reflection and thinking about how you want to show up, intentionalizing your anger and how you want to react when shit hits the fan. And guess what, buddy? That ain't going to work either. Doing all that prep work, you're still going to fail, and you're going to have to to show up afterwards and apologize and admit your responsibility and your blame in it. Because if you carry that attitude of well, I'm still not being heard and all poor is me and my voice is the loudest in the room, you're going to get nowhere. You have to humble yourself a little bit and say, you know what? I didn't show up. I'm still trying to work on this, to deal with this, to live with this. And I think, again, a lot of that work comes in the before and after. And if you work on those two things, the preparatory and the after action review, then I think you'll start chipping away at that 10% there that remains in the moment freakouts and breakdowns.
Yeah, man. And I'll say this much, you mentioned the ADHD kids and feeling emotions. My son definitely has the emotions come out in big ways. And I say in big ways because, it doesn't mean it's big ways and it's not bad. Sometimes there's blow-ups. Sometimes there's extreme joy. I've had just a moment where he turns to me and says, I love you, and gives me a big hug because he's feeling the emotion. I want to encourage that. I want him to explore that, and really just, I don't want him to feel like he's got to, hide certain emotions. So how do we handle anger? Well, sometimes we need to put action to our anger. You don't want to just like throw a fist at somebody because you feel hurt by them. A lot of times, taking action based on your anger can result in some, positive direction. I'm actually listening to a book, the book by Michelle Obama, Becoming, where she talked about how she experienced various levels of injustice or just, being treated differently. And she didn't put up with it. Sometimes she just voiced her thoughts right then and there. And she even talked about a moment where she went into a fist fight with somebody and then gained the respect. The two of them gained a respect for each other because they understood where the other one was coming from. And so being able to put your voice out there and saying, no, I don't feel this is fair. I don't feel this is justified. And then making a case for yourself, I think, is a very powerful thing. So that's one area where I would say anger can be used for a means of productivity. My son at this play area we were at recently, he was going about play just like a bunch of the other kids. And there was this one kid on the ground. They were all kind of tickling him. And I don't know, I didn't see what happened, but apparently they started pulling down this kid's pants a little bit, which this is a public space. So maybe pulling down the kid's pants isn't the best idea. Mom came over and she grabbed Cohen's arm, but it wasn't like I'm going to pull you away and be any difficult. But Cohen felt hurt. And then these kids were pointing, saying, well, he was the one to do it. And they were all involved with it. But then Cohen felt really offended. He's like, don't point your finger at me ever again. You're not my friend and stuff. And so I was able to kind of sit back with him and talk to him about that. It helped that I didn't really see the whole situation and kind of make a judgment call for myself. I could be curious more. So I asked him, what's going on? And he was very upset, saying they pointed their fingers and stuff. I said, yeah, man, that's hard, because basically what happened, from what I understand, is everybody's involved in the situation, but sometimes we don't want to have the finger pointed at us. But then you had more than one kid pointing the finger at you. So you felt called out, but you weren't, you were a participant in the situation. So yeah, that stinks. I wouldn't care for that either. How about we have a conversation about that with them and see if we can get somewhere with it? And so he went over. I actually let him walk over to the group, and the mother who pulled him away initially, she was there as well. And I just kind of watched. And, Cohen, who had just said, they'll never be my friends again. They were chatting, and then he started showing them his toys, and they started smiling and giggling. And the mom just looks at me. She gives me a thumbs up. And I was like, dang right, man. You know what we just witnessed? We witnessed kids. We gave them the space to trust, or we trusted them to get that space between them and to work it out. And from anger came, a conversation, which came to some sort of resolve. And I could say that I equipped him in some ways with that, and that's true. But I also gave him my trust to work the rest of that out. So I saw a situation where I could have gotten angry and said, dude, what are you doing? It's public space here, and you're trying to pull up this kid's clothes? That's not okay. No, instead I listened to him, and we talked about it. And then he had an opportunity to do the same with somebody else who was directly involved, who he felt very hurt by, and came to some amazing resolve. So I guess in the big grand scheme of things, with anger, usually it's a coping mechanism. It's a mechanism we can use to destroy relationship, or it's a mechanism where we can actually create some opportunity for growth, understanding, and advocacy. And I've heard it said before where justice isn't truly justice if you haven't forgiven somebody first. It's then therefore it's revenge. I see it working out in children so much where they take the idea of justice in these little micro moments of time where we're like, oh, it's just kids being kids. And they're just making a massive splash into their future by exercising their view of anger and justice and, play. All these things coming together to create some good. Because, kids with ADHD, like my son, they will experience those extreme emotions. And if we give all of our attention to those extreme emotions, then we don't see those beautiful moments that come later, where they're talking to the other kids. And the next thing you know, oh, we're friends again. I was never going to be friends with them 3 minutes ago, but here I am. Everything's great. This is something that it's more complicated as you grow older, but it also doesn't have to be so complicated if we give ourselves the pause, the breathing, like you said, and the opportunity to have space and then talk about it. I learned something about this person. I was angry with them, and then I learned about them, and now we're understanding each other.
Yeah, I really liked what you said about, how anger can be used as a tool, an opportunity to discover something or deal with a situation or pull a win out from it, right? And not just about destroying relationships, because I think that is what I was trying to kind of say earlier, that I think that was really like the powerful shift for me in my mindset and how to combat this, right? And it wasn't, God, this thing is destructive and it ruins every relationship. Every time it rears its head, it fucks shit up for me, And it was the shift of like, well, great. What a great opportunity this is to have some really great discourse and dialogue and figure out what's going on between two people. And once I started looking at it like that, what a beautiful, beautiful opportunity this is, because I'll be honest with you, man, I'm a huge believer in, the growth through trauma, and that life offers you lemons sometimes, but if it didn't, then how would we get that sweet, sweet lemonade, man? Life throws you some hard stuff. And it's not always easy to have the mindset of, I'm going to grow from this and grow. Sure. Look at this adversity in this obstacle. What a great thing for me to grow and become a better person, right? You never have that attitude when you're going through the thick of it, right? In divorce, you lose your job, relationship, love, finances, whatever. I mean, all you can see is that torment, that anger, that hurt, and all the bad stuff. But from those experiences in my life, through time, patience, effort, and curiosity comes some real growth potential, man. I've walked out through every hard thing in my life a better person because, you take the time to learn from it, and I know that's not always easy for people to say, but I think that kind of mindset can be applied here for anger too. That this isn't something that's here to destroy your life, but it's something here to, like a little light bulb in your brain going, let's be curious here. Let's see what's going on here. There's something to uncover here. You don't have all the information yet. You don't have all the all the bits to this. So that's why that little anger piece is going on, saying we don't understand everything here. We feel invalidated. We feel frustrated. We feel unheard because we haven't taken the time to be curious and get all of those missing pieces yet. So I really like what you're saying about the creating space aspect of this, because I think that's what the superpower is in that 10% moment that we're talking about while the shit's hitting the fan and your blood pressure's rising and your tone of voice is starting to get louder. What can the tool be? And I think it's that creating space methodology. I've really been trying to implore this seal it, feel it, and heal it before I deal it kind of mindset. I like a good wordplay and some good rhymes. Again, these are totems. That's a verbal totem for me in my mind. That's seal it, feel it, and heal it. So when I feel that blood pressure going up in my body and stuff, what's the first thing I got to do? Seal it, man. Shut your lips. Seal the lips, and let's not do any more damage here. Let's pull it back. Let's create some space here. Before I go pointing that finger and wagging it at everybody, telling them what they've done wrong and why I'm right, let's just seal it for a minute. And then the next one is feel it. What is this feeling that I'm feeling other than anger? Because like you said, this is a secondary emotion. So let's uncover the anger. Let's dust off the anger of this. What's underneath that? Is it frustration, sadness? What's going on? Let's just sit in that, man. Feel it. Feel it to your bones. Don't run from it. Don't turn from it. Feel it. Ask yourself some questions. Why? How? What's going on here with it? Once we seal it, feel it, let's heal it, man. Let's empathize with ourselves.
Yeah.
What's going on? It's okay.
I want to flesh that out even another step further. One of the great exercises that I've learned to manage this. You mentioned the feel it part. I think one of the most powerful things we can do for ourselves and for the people that we need to serve in relationship with, especially when we're in anger, is to separate out the thoughts and the feelings. Your feelings are going to be real. Those are not something that can be argued against, right? Because you are truly feeling this. You're feeling angry. You're feeling sad. Now we should really first identify the thoughts. So I think this, and that makes me feel this, because when we do that, we usually create a rational person, a rational thought. But when we just go straight to feelings and we haven't worked through those thoughts, we generally act on those feelings out of irrationality toward the other person. And that's where we kind of find ourselves getting in trouble. So, I could be really angry at this person because they did something. Well, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking they don't respect my opinion, and that makes me sad. Because of what I see them doing, I think this, which they might think that's not what I was intending, and therefore you have a disagreement on that, and you can work toward understanding each other. But right now, I'm feeling the sadness. I want to get through the sadness by working through each other's perspective. So I think this way. It might not be rational. I might not be seeing it right. Let's talk about that. And now we can address those feelings. And usually those feelings get resolved much more quickly when we have the opportunity to step back and parse that out a little bit.
I was listening to another podcast, and the guest was talking about 9 steps for managing a meltdown. Google that. She was also saying, that most people don't get past the first 3 steps, that usually the meltdown kind of course corrects itself by step 3, but there are 9 steps. I definitely recommend going out there and Googling 9 steps on how to manage a meltdown. But I just found it kind of interesting because the first 3 steps were be silent, validate, and empathize. And usually if you do those 3 things, the meltdown stops. And I thought, God, transfer this to adults, right? That's what we need too. This works for a 35-year-old man the same as it does for a 5-year-old kid, man. That's all that we want is we just want to be listened to. We just want to have our words validated, and we just want to be empathized with. We just want us to be told that we're right and that people understand and that what we're feeling is real. Right. And I just think that that's just so powerful, and some of the other steps are worth taking a look at too. They were about asking how they would like to solve this problem, and if it still doesn't get there, then it's maybe about asking about, well, would you like me to help you solve this problem? And if the answer is yes, then you move on to step 8 and step 9, step 7, step 8 and step 9, which is categorizing the 2, right, into things that you can change and things that you can't. And, how can you, and then the next step is how can you deal with the things that you can change? And then the last step, step 9, if you make it that far, is how can you accept things that you cannot change, right? But again, I think those 3 steps, be silent, validate, and empathize, are really so important. And that's kind of what I'm talking about with this whole seal it, feel it, and heal it with yourself. It's the same kind of principle. Just listen, sit back, stay silent, sit back and listen to yourself, validate that it's okay to feel those feelings and that they're real. This is the same thing that I'm saying to do with the kid in a meltdown versus an adult or a coworker versus yourself. I think that, again, these are tried true methods that with repetition, you can chip away at this kind of stuff, Yeah.
That just makes me think about, really kind of truly facing it head on. A lot of times what gets us in trouble is our patterns of toxic, cycle of behaviors and stuff. Taking extreme ownership of your part in it is a big deal. And if you've gotten angry with somebody, really taking those steps. And then in addition, like the thoughts and all the things that go into why am I here? Why am I feeling this? And then, don't even think about the other person until you've also thought about yourself. And be totally honest. The worst thing we can do is, well, probably not the worst. There's a lot of worse things, but one of the bad habits I think people do when they get angry is they try and find a reason to justify it. Is anger justifiable? Sometimes yes, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's to that point where we've lost our patience. We've now gotten to a space of irrationality, and therefore we are now feeling angry, and then we use too many justifications to keep ourselves in that space rather than really addressing things. What's the problem? I want to ask anybody and everybody, what's the problem with owning it and actually giving a true apology for it? Right. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's actually the way you build trust. One of the core ways you can build trust with somebody. So how can we lock
our ego up and do that? Yeah.
Yes. How do I apologize to somebody? Well, if I'm going to take extreme ownership of this, I'm going to really face myself, my inner demons. We all have them. I'm going to have to address myself. I'm going to have to say, this is what I did wrong. This is how it affected that other person. I need to be fully remorseful. I need to suggest ways that I'm going to apologize, true apology, and I'm going to suggest ways that I'm going to make it right, or at least I'm going to work toward being better, because then that doesn't give me an opportunity to justify why I'm upset. That instead gives me an opportunity to build a better relationship with this person.
Yeah, that extreme ownership piece, I think, is really crucial to this. That accountability, owning your part in it, and to stop that finger pointing, that wagging that we're talking about. Jocko Willink's book Extreme Ownership was a really big book in my life too, as far as looking at each scenario with no blame, with no finger pointing, taking you don't even concern yourself with that. It's all about just what could I have controlled here? How could I have communicated? Even if it's somebody's fault, somebody missed a deadline, it's still our responsibilities to there's still things that we could have done in our part and manage our part in it. And I think that book was just really eye-opening to me, and to step out of the victim mentality of, well, there's always somebody that, or a reason or a scenario that, didn't work out in my favor or didn't land me with the ideal set of circumstances or the right tools to do so. It doesn't matter. I have to take that extreme ownership piece, and that's the only way that I'm going to find the growth from it and become better, is if I can be honest with myself in a non-judgmental way, and own each piece of what I could have done better, and how I would like to recover and grow the next time round, because a lot of us just, it wasn't my fault. I couldn't have the thing. I didn't have this. I didn't have that. I was late. My shoes were missing. I forgot my wallet, or whatever the thing may be. But, and those things do happen, and they are valid reasons, but, they're just not good enough. If you want to grow, they're just not good enough. You have to be able to ask yourself the right questions to get there and to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that people should keep in mind here is that we're not talking about shame. We're not saying something like, I'm so stupid for this. I did this wrong. I can't get things right. No, we're not talking about ownership in that way. We're saying, I made a mistake and I'm owning up to it. This is something that I did. Here's the steps that I can, take to make it better. For example, I went through a divorce, and at a time I was definitely using the words she, her, so on and so forth, more than I was using the words like, this is what I did. This is who I am. And we both made mistakes. We both did some things we should not have. We both acted out of anger. We both made a lot of contributions to the, basically the destruction of the family. And that's awful that happened. But what good would it be if I were to take that and say, well, she did all these things. Now that I'm going to go, into a new relationship, well, I don't have to think about her when really all I'm doing is, thinking about her. Or I can take, this is what I did. This is how I responded to things that I felt weren't fair. And I've moved past that. And here are the things that I did that were a mistake. I did not give her the space. I did not validate her in these ways. And I can learn and grow from that. So I'm not saying, I'm a shameful, horrible person. I just made all these mistakes, and the dismantling of my family was all my fault, and I'm terrible. No, instead, it's an opportunity to really say, I own up to this. And now I have an opportunity to actually model the person that I'm really truly am destined to be through this process. It sucks that sometimes major feelings get hurt, and people are hurt through the process, but that doesn't mean that we have to live in that process and say, yep, I'm terrible because this. Say, no, I'm a capable human being because I'm aware and I take ownership of that.
We talked about earlier about how that creating space may be the superpower in the moment, and I think that the other superpower when kind of dealing with anger or high emotions is grace, right? We have to have a little bit of grace with ourselves. This isn't something where you hear a podcast and you just operate with the standard now. Like, this takes work. It takes practice. It takes many days, weeks, months, if not years of putting this into effect and thinking about it. And with that practice comes a lot of failing, a lot of tripping, a lot of falling on your face, and a lot of having to recover with grace and dignity. And if you're sitting there with that shame and guilt all the time, just beating yourself up, just berating yourself in your head because you slipped up again, that's just going to fuel that little anger monster in your pocket. You have to have some grace and forgiveness and say, you know what, I fell, but I'm going to get back up. Here's what I learned. Here's how I want to show up next time. And here's who I want to be. So again, I think that 90%, you're going to get through the 10% with creating that little bit of space, and you're going to get through the other 90% of that work by having a little bit of grace and forgiveness for yourself. So yeah, man, this has been a great talk. If you have anything else that you want to add to this, I would love to as we wrap things up. But I just wanted to tell listeners we'll have all the resources in the show notes for you, some links and stuff to some of the books that we've talked about: Scream Free Parenting, Extreme Ownership with Jocko Willink, and the link to the 9 steps for managing a meltdown. But JJ, if you have anything else that you want to talk about or throw out now at the end of this, I would love to hear it.
I do, and this is a big one for me. The word that I've kind of come back to a lot of times is escalation. Escalation is something that I think everybody struggles with at some point when it comes to anger. How do I make sure my voice is heard over your voice? I can escalate the situation. Some parents, believe in, corporal punishment, and that's a just topic for another time. My view is that that's a form of escalation, and that causes our children to, be overpowered. And it teaches them the opportunity that they could overpower somebody else when they're, when the situation is escalating. Or I can escalate, with my kiddo by he's out of control, and therefore I'm going to get louder and I'm going to be out of control. I'm escalating the situation to the point where I've won. And in fact, it doesn't do that. And it models to him that if he just continues, if he escalates higher, then he has the opportunity to win the situation. And win is not, accurate. You're really losing out when you escalate. So the big thing that to me that I've learned over time with a kid who has ADHD is, they're gonna go from 0 to 100 awfully quick sometimes. Do we want to go to 110 and be totally out of control and run this into this out of control vehicle into a pool? That's not going to work. It doesn't work ever. I've never seen it where a place of escalation actually results in progress. I've seen it happen only the opposite direction, at least in my my situation and in my, for what I witnessed through others and what I've heard from their stories. And when you are experiencing a kid who has ADHD, who is, seemingly out of control with their emotions, I've seen such a drastic turnaround when de-escalation tactics take place. And what does that look like? Sometimes It just simply looks like with a crying kid who's screaming, which I experienced this last week, a crying kid who's screaming. I just got down at his eye level and I just stared at him and had my arms out, and he cried and he came into my arms, and then he was calm within a minute, and then he was back to playing and having a good time. We just think that because we're the person who's out of control at that point, that leaning into that state of escalation and being out of control is somehow going to create a positive controlled situation. We're fooling ourselves. And we have so much evidence in our own everyday experience. We can look back and realize, yeah, that really didn't actually result in a positive change here. So escalation is a word that I always kind of refer back to when I try to remind myself, hey, are you escalating the situation, or are you helping everybody? Because it can't be both.
I mean, if we can be that calm in the room, just think about the example that we're setting for our kids and the kind of behavior that we're modeling for them. I really, that's the kind of parent I want to be. That's the superpower that I want to have here is to be able to be the calm in the room. I think, I've talked about the kind of parent that I want to be, in the sense of wanting to create the safest space for my kids to be able to come to me and talk to me and open up about the obstacles that are going to present themselves in front of them in their lives. So, I think how do we get there is what you're talking about here is being the calm and letting them have that meltdown and still being able to validate and empathize. So JJ, thank you so much, brother. This was a great talk. I really enjoyed this today. For your listeners, thank you guys for tuning in so much. Again, we'll have all the info in the show notes for you. Make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I'm CJ.
I'm JJ.
And this is the ADHDads. Have a good one, guys.
See you guys.